Hey folks, Michael Mann from Michael Mann Security Services. Welcome to Civil Unrest, a Protector's Guide to Safety. Hey, before we get started, this is how you get a hold of us. Website, michaelmannsecurityservices.com. You can email Scott M, SCOTTM, at michaelmannsecurityservices.com. You can also get us on Facebook and Instagram at Safe with Man, M-A-N-N. All right? Hey, some things coming up. We had a lot of people register for this one, even more than normal. So as those folks are jumping on, let me tell you what's coming up for us. We got a lot of stuff coming up at the end of this month and in July. A lot of stuff. All right, so Tuesday, July 7th, here in Nashville, actually in the Antioch suburb of Nashville, Handgun Safety Personal Protection, July 7th. That's going to be in the evening, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. at Lighthouse Christian School. Go to our website. You can go to Eventbrite and register. People are starting to register already. We just put this out. So a lot of interest today because of all the things going on. We're going to talk about that today. People are asking about handguns, self-protection, self-defense. So we're going to cover all those items and all those questions in this seminar. So this is in person. We're going to have refreshments for everybody, and you're going to get a chance to win prizes and discounts that you can apply toward training. All right? So that is July the 7th, Antioch, Tennessee. Church Protection Specialist Module 1, happy to say we have our first international student. So we've got this coming up July 12th. And this is a virtual webinar or platform. So this is Module 1 of our Church Protection Specialist Certification Program. We've already got several churches throughout the nation or team members from other churches that have, registered. And then we have someone from Nigeria, Scott? Is that, yeah. So we have our first international student for one of our virtual classes. So this is July 12th. You can register again through our webpage at michaelmannsecurityservices.com, or you can look us up on Eventbrite and register directly through Eventbrite. That's going to be Sunday, July 12th, 1 p.m. to 5 p.m., 4 hours, Module 1. Remember, for certification, if you don't know, there's 3 modules to get certified. All right, something else, July 14th. So, terrorism prevention for the security professional. This is going to be at Fellowship Bible Church. This is again in the evening on Tuesday, 14th, 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. This is free. Refreshments for everybody. Same thing as our handgun safety class. You're going to get a chance to win prizes. All those who participate in this training get a digital certificate of participation. They could go towards your license. So if you're an armed security professional, unarmed security professional, you want to know about today's environment, you want to learn about anti-terrorism strategies for your client, and be able to identify those things before they occur, that's what this is for. It's open for all security professionals. We limit the number because of social distancing. Obviously, it has already started to fill up. Get there before the 12th, or you're going to lose a space if you wanted one. Something worthwhile to show up to see. All right. Carjacking Defense, we are teaming up with Sheepdog Krav Maga in Mount Juliet, Tennessee on Saturday, July 18th from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Going to show you everything about the self-defense in and out of the car, both with unarmed combatives and with a handgun. One, again, from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Don't want to miss that. That's in Mount Juliet, east of us now. And our most popular class, this is half full. So we've already got 6 folks in the class. Probably after our handgun safety seminar, it will be full. So if you've looked at this on our website, you better jump on it. We've done 2 in the last month. Both of them have filled up. So July 24th in the evening, and then all day on Saturday, July 25th, Brentwood, Tennessee. This is an introduction to Colonel Cooper's modern technique. This can be for if you've got a carry permit already and you want some advanced training, or you don't have your carry permit and you want to know the right way to actually fight with a weapon. That's what this teaches. And if you don't have your carry permit, at the end of the class, you will get the paperwork to go get your concealed carry permit in the state of Tennessee. It's already half full, folks. It will be filled before July 7th. You better jump on it. Okay? All right, so we'll move on. A lot of stuff going on in July. Let's talk about what's going to happen, expectations. About 40 minutes. There's a lot of content we're going to cover, okay? Like always, we're going to have a Q&A at the end of this. I expect some questions because of our current environment and the things that we're talking about today, all right, civil unrest. So I'm going to give you some context before we get into what it is we're going to talk about. So some of the history behind some of the things that you're seeing. And then I'm going to get into the basic protection model. Whether you're a church security team, you're a person that's curious, you're a citizen, a mom and dad, whatever, what this means to you, what it is we're experiencing today, all the civil unrest, all the upheaval that you see, that you watch in the news, that you're concerned with. We're going to talk about it, how you protect yourself, how do you protect your family, how do you protect your church, okay? All right, here's something I want you to remember. So at our church, some staff members are very concerned. Had a conversation with a staff member a couple of weeks ago, and you know, she was worked up about this, and I said, hey, and this is somebody that's she's close to my age. I said, look, none of this is a surprise, and it's not new. We can go back to 40 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. This was happening in our country. It's just today, with the amount of social media and the coverage in politics, there's a lot more focus on it. So let's go back to Scripture so we know. So, you know, look, hey, this is not just for church security teams today. If you're an executive protection professional, you work for an insurance company, you're a law enforcement officer, you want to know about this, that's great. But this does apply to you also, okay? God tells us what has been will be again. What has been done will be done again, and there is nothing new under the sun. We can even add the human element to this. Someone added to this a while back, there's nothing new under the sun except the history that we forgot or that we chose to forget. This is nothing new for us. We're human beings. We're broken. The things that we are seeing today, again, we saw them 40 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. Don't be troubled. Don't be troubled about it. We, as believers, know the end of the story. It's just going to be uncomfortable while we're down here. So we're going to talk about today how to protect yourself, your family, your church, and everybody else from this. All right? So again, this is nothing new. If you don't believe me, go in Scripture. Even in the Old Testament, these things were happening then. All right? So let's talk about protection. All right? We're going to get into the basic protection model in just a second. But this is something you guys are seeing. So here's the context for what I want to set you guys up for what we're going to talk about here shortly on this protection from civil unrest, or how it is we protect our families and our churches. So law enforcement protection, why is it? So you guys have heard me over the last 12 webinars at least talk about it is our job in this country. We live in a republic. It is our job to protect ourselves, our family, our businesses, our churches. Well, where do we get the idea that the police protect us? So today what you're probably seeing when you watch TV, if you're stuck on the news and social media like everybody else is, and you're concerned about what's happening, you want to know where you got the idea that the police protect. And so what you're seeing right now is, number one, they can't protect. There's not enough, and they have guidelines and rules. And number two, they won't. Okay? So where did we get the idea that in this country the police are here to protect us? I was just listening to something on a newscast the other day. I don't watch TV, but I do get news feeds from Facebook. And I was listening to something where what was going on in Seattle, there were business owners saying the police can't get in to protect us. And again, I thought, where did that idea come from? And of course, I know. And so we're going to talk about that to give you context of what we're going to get into. So understand, again, we live in a republic. We have a Bill of Rights. We're going to get into that when we start talking about the legal portion of this. But in this country, the idea that the police are here to protect us came really, I think that there was a change in the 60s. Okay? The idea that they're here to protect us. In the late 60s, what you are seeing today was happening then. We were in a war in Southeast Asia. People were coming home. There were protests about that war because they're Americans. A lot of Americans believe we shouldn't be there. There was a lot of violence. So we're talking about in the 60s, a lot of issues with civil rights. We saw a lot of violence in the streets because of that. There was a lot of left-wing terrorism going on in the United States at that time. And the police, law enforcement, were going through changes. And so in the 60s, very specifically, out west in Los Angeles, there were a number of police officers that were attacked and were killed. And then throughout the country, we had other events that were happening where there was a sniper in Austin, Texas. They got up on top of a tower at a college there and killed a number of people. The police weren't prepared to respond to that. There were just a number of things that happened. And so Los Angeles Police Department at that time went to the United States Marine Corps, and they developed what you know today as SWAT teams. Back then, they wanted to call them Special Weapons and Attack Teams, and the department said no. So they actually went to the U.S. military to learn how to deal and respond with some of these violent events that at the time were happening in Los Angeles, California. And the idea behind that was that when these bad things happened, that someone would respond to it. So they would be waiting, and they would go and respond to this thing and solve it. Well, it was a Los Angeles idea, but very quickly, when other police departments saw what LA was doing, they decided to copy that idea. Now, they didn't have the resources that Los Angeles had. I was out in Los Angeles back about 15, 20 years ago training, and the relationship with the Marine Corps is still there with some of the units in the police department. But these other departments didn't have that, and so they kind of copied this idea of this SWAT team. And again, initially, LA thought this was a response thing. If something bad happened, you'd call them. But what happened in the 70s, 80s, into the 90s, and today, those teams were no longer responders. Those teams were used to do other things, to fight the war on drugs, and to fight other crime-related offenses. And it became almost a money generator for police departments. It has. It's funded personnel. It's funded equipment. And so in the 60s, when we basically militarized police departments, I think the American public in general started to believe that the police departments were here to protect us. That was the job. Because we started seeing them carrying rifles. They had body armor. And so I think there was just a misunderstanding. And, of course, as Americans, sometimes we can be very lazy. We don't understand our history. We don't understand our form of government. And we don't care because we're so blessed and we have all these things. And so it probably started then. And this idea that the police are here to protect us came about. And as you're seeing now, that is just not the case. But again, remember, 40 years ago this is happening. 20 years ago it was happening. It was happening 5 years ago, and you're just seeing it today. So, again, the idea of this, it was they would respond, but they did not. It turned into something else. So I want you to remember, we still live in a republic, and the job of protection falls on us, not the police. So when we talk about private businesses, we talk about churches, that is our responsibility. There are times when we depend on the government, we go to them for help, like you're seeing throughout the country. Private business owners, people are asking the people that they've elected what it is they're supposed to do, and you're kind of seeing what that response looks like. So this falls on us. It does not fall on them. So let's get into that. Protections, we start talking about protecting ourselves. Those protections fall under our Bill of Rights. So let's talk about the protector again. We talked about this already, but the protector does something very, very specific, and that's prevention, not response. We prevent harm from occurring, and we do that, number one, through deterrence, and number two, through gathering information. And I'm going to show you how to gather information here shortly so you can learn about these events so you can try to prevent them from happening or at least prevent yourself from walking into something that you don't want to be a part of. All right? This is all about risk mitigation. Protection and prevention is all about mitigating risk. And so we're going to get into what that means for you guys when we start talking about civil unrest. So the basic protection model. If you've had training from Michael Mann Security Services, you've listened to our webinars, you've heard me talk about this before. This is an executive protection concept, but it applies to anything. It applies to any concept we talk about protection or prevention. And so it gets into number one, awareness, number two, avoidance, number three, defense. You notice defense is always last. I'm going to get into all of these elements in detail, and you're going to learn why at the last of this presentation, why defense is always a last resort. So awareness gets into knowledge of the situation. I want knowledge of the situation to understand how to prevent or protect something. When we start to talk about avoidance, we want to avoid exposure to what it is that we're concerned with. And of course, defense gets into resisting an attack. It is reactive in nature. As citizens, this is our last resort. Okay? So let's get into, we start talking about this civil unrest, awareness. So we live in the United States of America. We live in a country that has a rule of law. Our governing body or our governing document is the Constitution of the United States of America. 4 years after the Constitution was signed, because our founding fathers had lived through an oppressive government before, very specifically England, They understood that the document, that Constitution, was not enough, that there were some rights and there were some freedoms that were so important that not even the majority could interfere with them or should. And so James Madison drafted those Bill of Rights. And very specifically, when we talk about what we're going to get into talk about, we're talking about the First Amendment, for that, so that freedom of speech, and of course that freedom to petition the government if there's a grievance. The Second Amendment, the right to protect ourselves. And very specifically, when we start talking about law enforcement, some of the things where we're seeing grievances of today, that's the Fourth Amendment, or that freedom from unreasonable search and seizure. Because some of the grievances that folks are talking about are those seizures. And under the law, if the government seizes you, we're talking about use of force, that can be a violation of the Constitution. So understand, we have a rule of law in the country. That governing body is the Constitution, and the laws are made to protect the people very specifically. So you might ask the question, well, is this some sort of a civics class? No, I'm providing you the context of what we're about to get into. Now understand what it is you're seeing today. A lot of the things that you see, just so you understand, are not legal. And so when we start to talk about the First Amendment allows us as citizens, because it's a right that the government should not interfere with, because of what we learned, or what our founding fathers learned about living under an oppressive government. So, awareness. We start talking about a protest. A protest is a statement or action, very specifically, that it expresses disapproval of something that has happened, an event or an action. Now, that First Amendment guarantees the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for that grievance. So there's not anything wrong with a grievance in when we assemble as peaceful people and we protest. There's not anything wrong with that. It is our right. That is what should happen. And believe it or not, when we look through our history and we look to see how things changed in our country, it wasn't necessarily always through violence or what people think that violence will do. It's when peaceful people have talked about things that should happen, and they were able to change the minds of people, and people voted and brought about change. Violence, especially today, only brings division and only separates and only causes additional fear, which changes nothing. Okay? So protests are fine. What we see today is civil unrest. We're seeing protests, but we're seeing a lot of civil unrest. So civil unrest is a gathering of 3 or more people in reaction to an event with the intention of causing a public disturbance in violation of the law. Now, very specifically, what you guys are starting to see in some of the bigger cities is property damage, injury to people. That is a violation of the law. That is criminal activity, and that exposes us, or obviously you and your church, or whoever you're trying to protect, to danger. Now, when this happens, this is when the police are to step in. They are reactive in nature. So as we protect our property, when our property starts to get damaged and there is crime, especially what we see today, that is the time for the police to step in, to take control and to make arrests, because they are seeing that. So they are reacting to something. It is a crime that's being committed in their presence. They should act. Obviously, right now what we're seeing is politically, government leaders are afraid to act, and so they're allowing things to happen. At some point, they will step in to take control. Probably not going to be pretty. Again, I'm not watching it. I'm not really paying attention to it. If you are, and if you've never seen this before, it never ends well for either party. So understand, there is a right to protest that is peaceful, and we're seeing that, but we're also seeing civil unrest or civil disobedience. And when we start to damage property and we start to harm people, that is illegal, and that is when the police are, based on our form of government, that's the point for them to step in and make that arrest and take control. Okay? So again, when we start to look at civil unrest, I want to avoid it. So you've got the awareness, you understand the law, the background, the context of where some of the grievances are coming from today, where we got the idea of where the police are to protect us, okay, and what the law says, what it is that we're supposed to do or what someone is supposed to do if there is a grievance, all right? So now let's talk about the avoidance piece. So you're aware of why what's happening, maybe why it's happening, some background, some context. How do we avoid this, all right? So avoidance is nothing, again, but risk. We're talking about risk mitigation. There's a number of ways to mitigate risk. We can separate it, we can transfer it so we can get insurance, but what we really want to do is we want to avoid it. Now, a lot of times risk avoidance could be expensive, so I'm going to show you some ways to avoid this that are absolutely free, okay? So personal threat assessment process, how does this apply to us, and how does this apply to civil unrest, okay? So threat is always based on intention, all right? So that is the intent for someone to do something. It is always based on the capability for someone to do that or that threat to follow through. And then it's also based on the frequency. If we look at what is happening today, there's intent. That intent is very blatant. It's happening throughout the country, so there is a frequency. And you can see as people get together, the capability to do what they do, obviously that capability is there. So how do we do this? So there's a guy named Bob Oatman who is a kind of in the forefront and a leader, or was for many, many years in the executive protection industry. He still does. He has a large school. He's written a number of books. Very smart guy when it comes to protection. And he says this in his class. I heard this at his resident training program years ago. It's not about the gun, it's about the advance. And as protectors, the advance for us is that security plan. What does that mean? What are we doing to prepare for civil unrest? So we start to talk about these risk assessment tools. Here's some tools that you can start to use. So if you're trying to pay attention for your church, if you live in a town and you're concerned about civil disobedience or civil unrest, if you're traveling, whatever, how do you find out, or where is it that you can get information? Okay. And that first place is just the local news. Now, I don't watch the news. I don't watch TV. So this is not a location where I'm going to get in a lot of information. But if you're someone that is glued to the TV, and a lot of people are today, that's unfortunate, because the media does create a lot of fear. And the reason why they do that is because it makes people watch it more, and it increases ratings, and they make money off of that. But you can get information about what is happening in your city or location, or where you're going to travel, or maybe about the person you're trying to protect from the local news. All right. Another location is going to be something called Rally List. And I'm going to show you what these look like. Rally List is a website. Now understand what you're seeing today, it is very organized. So whether it's a protest or whether it's civil disobedience or unrest, these groups are funded and they are also very organized. The cool thing about it is, because they want other people to show up, a lot of this is posted in open source areas, and Rally List is one of those locations. So what you can do, and I'll show you what it looks like in just a second, you can go to rallylist.com. You can type in the city where you're going or where you live, and you can see what events are listed. Because, again, it's necessary for a lot of these protesters and some of these people that are causing civil disobedience or civil unrest to get people to show up. The more people that they get to show up, the more attention they get, and the more they can focus on their cause. And unfortunately, if they're breaking the law, the more people they can get involved in some of this criminal activity. So you can go to Rally List and you can see what's going on in your city. Eventbrite. We use Eventbrite a lot. Eventbrite, if you go to the Eventbrite page, it will show where there are protests scheduled. People will actually put protests on Eventbrite. And again, I'm going to walk you through the websites and where to look at to get this open source information. Of course, Twitter and Facebook are also very popular social media outlets. You can look to see, Twitter, you're going to see feeds all the time, but Facebook has event pages. You can go there. That's open source information. And then, of course, your Fusion Center, very specifically your church, I would make contact with your Fusion Center, and I would start getting a relationship with them. Now, in the Fusion Centers, there's different types of information. There's open source information that they can share with you as law enforcement officials and as you as a private citizen. And then there's going to be restricted information that could be law enforcement sensitive or sensitive by nature in some other way, and they may not be able, or they will not be able to share that information with you. But they do have some open source information very specifically about threats that will probably help you. Okay, So when we start to look at rally lists, so you go to rallylist.com, you can see on the page, and I'm just going to point it out. So if you go up, you'll just say rally alerts. And so when you go to rally alerts, and this is the front page, you can see where all the protests are occurring. You can go to rally alerts, and once you go to rally alerts, you can actually subscribe, type in your name and email address, and they will send you alerts. And you can also, at the right side of the page, you can put in your city and state to see what is happening in your city or state, to see if there's any kind of protests that are going to be happening anytime soon. And so this is an open source avoidance tool for you, a risk assessment tool where you could go to find out what's going to be happening in your city. Okay. We talked about Eventbrite. When you pull up Eventbrite, we use Eventbrite a lot to announce our events. Well, protesters do the same thing today because it's a social media tool. People pay attention to it. It's open source. And so this is now the front page of Eventbrite. And you can see before I even log in on the very front page, you can see where they're announcing protest. And you can see the bubbles and the locations of the cities. You can take your cursor and you can kind of go over those little yellow bubbles there. And it'll tell you what city that is. And then you can scroll down and actually type into the search bar up top here. And it will tell you in your city what protests are happening. This is another good tool for avoidance to figure out what's going on in your city, when it's going to take place, and what's going to be involved. Cool thing about Eventbrite, just like us, when we put events in Eventbrite, they'll put a lot of information. They'll tell you what they expect, what to bring, things to do while you're there, and so while they're protesting. So a lot of good open source information in Eventbrite that you can use as a risk or threat assessment tool. Facebook. If you're on Facebook, which obviously you're on Facebook right now, if you open up your page and you look to the left of the page, you're going to see events. If you've never used Facebook for events, and we use Facebook a lot, so it's a wonderful tool for marketing and for social media, you can click on events. This page is going to come up, and right away, based on your interest, you'll see a lot of, Facebook gathers information, obviously. And a lot of events are going to come up anyway based on things that you've been looking at or your interests. And then what you can do in the search bar up top, you can just type in protests. And those events will come up showing you in your city or close to you what is happening. So another great open source tool for you to use. Okay? So that's the avoidance piece. So we talked about awareness. We talked about the law. We talked about the law of our land. That we live in a rule of law, or what the republic is a rule of law, and that the Constitution is the basis for that. That the Bill of Rights guarantees a very specific rights that not even the majority can interfere with because they are important, which includes the right to protest and the right to actually file a grievance or have a grievance with our government. All right. Now we're going to get into the defense part. Okay, and again, I'm sorry, avoidance, we talked about those risk assessment tools that you use. Now let's get into defense. So this is a big thing. We get questions all the time. Hey, what does it mean to protect my church? Somebody shows up and they want to protest because this has come up. I had a conversation with our security team on Sunday. As we start to see the events that are occurring, I want you to understand, and if we hurt somebody's feelings here, we apologize, but I'm telling you, as protesters and folks that are breaking the law, so I will say those that are causing civil unrest, as they start to tear down buildings and statues, that is order. These are things this is history of our country. Church protection teams, the cross is next. The cross is offensive. It always has been. It is the ultimate order. God is the ultimate order of this world, and Satan hates him. And when we talk about human beings, the cross is the order. It is our salvation, and we know the end of the story, but it is next. And if you start to pay attention, we are starting to see it now. There are things on social media now where there are those folks that like to break the law and that are causing trouble. They are already starting to mention that. It has always been offensive. It always will be. But here's the cool thing. We know the end of the story. So let's talk about defense. So when we start to talk about defense, we're going to start to talk about the use of force for a private citizen, which is different than that of a police officer. Okay? So I want you to understand, as a private citizen, we are held to a very high standard when we start to talk about the use of force. All right? So unlike a police officer or unlike a government official, we do not have immunities or privileges like they have. And what that means is, so if you're watching the news, you probably heard there's cities and there's groups that want to change the way that we do law enforcement. And very specifically, if you're a police officer and you get into an incident and you have to use force, there's something called qualified immunity, where basically what that means is if you followed your use of force policies, if you've done everything you're supposed to do, qualified immunity can protect you from a lawsuit, like personally. And so I think there's some push out there in some places where they want to take that ability away from a police officer. So police officers have immunities and they have privileges that we do not have. So if we get up there, or we get out there and we use force and it's not justified, or we go beyond the level of force that is allowed based on our law, then we don't have that immunity and we're held liable for that. So there is a very high standard for the private citizen when it comes to use of force. When you start to look at the use of force, very specifically use of deadly force, and it talks about us, private citizens, you're going to hear words like imminent. And imminent means like it's going to happen right now. It's going to happen right now or in a second, and you know that and you can explain that. You're going to hear words like reasonable. You're going to hear words like last resort, or words like last resort, and we're going to get into those, okay? So let's talk about a case that just happened. If you pay attention, so I think a week ago in Albuquerque, New Mexico, there was a group that wanted to tear down a statue at a New Mexico State Museum. There were a group of folks there that did not want that to happen. And this gentleman got into some kind of a confrontation with a group of protesters, or a group that was, committing civil unrest. Somehow it got into the point where they tried to attack him with a skateboard. Somebody pulled a knife. This gentleman had a carry permit. No, he did not have a carry permit, but he had a weapon on him, and he ended up having to draw the pistol, and he shot one of the protesters. Albuquerque PD very quickly, they were there, but they very quickly acted. They took him into custody. They arrested him. They charged him with some things. He ended up getting an attorney. And since then, the city of Albuquerque has come out and they said, hey, we kind of rushed to judgment on this. We've reviewed some video. This is still under investigation, but they've released him, and I believe the state has taken over this investigation. And so some things that based on news reports and news feeds that I've read, it looks like this guy didn't have a carry permit, or maybe there was something he was supposed to have, he did not. There's some question that maybe he might have instigated some of this, and so all these are being investigated by the state. But understand, he actually used deadly force. We're going to get into what that means. And because he actually used deadly force, there was an investigation. Quickly, he was taken into custody, and now the state's looking into this. So we start to look at the use of force, very specifically use of deadly force as a private citizen. We're going to be held to a very high standard. So let's talk about that. What is deadly force? What does that mean for us as a private citizen? So deadly force is any force that is likely or intended to cause death or serious bodily injury. What does that mean? Death, as you know, means the heart stops beating, the blood stops pumping in the body. So the brain stops, okay? That is death. That's clinical death in the United States of America. Serious bodily injury, depending on where you live, could mean a number of things, but in general, it could mean protracted unconsciousness. So like, you knock somebody out for an extended amount of time. It could mean extreme physical, like discomfort or pain. It could mean permanent scarring. It could mean that someone loses like the function of an external organ. So all those can be considered, depending on where you live, serious bodily injury. Now, when we start to talk about when you can use deadly force, as you go through the process, if you read about this, it talks about a last resort. Deadly force, because it's any force likely to or intended to cause death or serious bodily injury, which is something very, very serious, should only be used as a last resort when all lesser means have failed or cannot be reasonably employed. And what that means is I've done everything else I can do, and because I believe the threat of death or serious bodily injury to me is imminent, which means I think it's going to happen, then I can use deadly force. Now, there's always confusion that comes up. Like in the state of Tennessee, some people call it the Castle Doctrine. That's what it's called in South Carolina. They don't call it here, but in the state of Tennessee, there are certain locations that you can be in where if someone forces their way in, that the use of deadly force under the law, or there's a presumption under the law that it is allowed. Okay? Here, we don't, in the state of Tennessee and other states, very specifically in the South, we don't have to run away from the threat. But I would tell you, as a private citizen, to use any type of force, to include deadly force, if I could get away, I would get away. So if I was not aware and I chose not to avoid, and I got into a situation, I walked in to one of these places or locations and this is happening, I would do everything I could to stay away from the use of force. Because, very specifically, deadly force, because it is a last resort and it should only be used when everything else that you've got in your toolbox is not going to work. Okay? So when we start to talk about what does that mean, like, so when can we use it? So you've talked about the law. I still don't understand. So understand, we start to talk about self-defense, to get a judge or a jury to let us plead in self-defense. You can't start the fight. You can't aggravate people. You can't start it. You can't instigate it. You can't continue something. There's a lot of rules around the use of force. We talk about defense. And this is when we start to talk about the basic protection model: awareness, avoidance, and defense. Why defenses always last. When we start to think about or talk about when you can use it, here's when you can use deadly force. It's very simple. Most of the time we start to think about the person that we're using that force against to protect ourselves. There has to be means. There has to be intent. So let me go over that very, very quickly. And this is kind of a general guideline that most states follow. So number one, the person, whether it's like somebody breaking your house or you're in a crowd somewhere and someone comes to attack you, or you're at your church. Number one, the person has to have the ability to cause death or serious bodily injury to you or someone that you're trying to protect. And so what that means is they have the power. And most of the time when we teach this, it means like they have a weapon. Now, there are some exceptions to ability, and one is disparity of force. And what that means is we call these escalating factors. It means like somebody's bigger, somebody's stronger, they have some skills you don't have, or maybe there's more than one. And that's what happened with the situation in New Mexico. There was more than one attacker, and then somebody did pull a knife, somebody did have a weapon. But before that weapon was seen and before it was seen on that video, there were a number of people that attacked the guy if you watch the video. And so right away as this thing started to roll, as you kind of watch it, before the knife was pulled and before it got heated, there were a number of people. So you could possibly look at that as disparity of force. So again, it could be somebody's bigger, somebody's stronger, somebody has skills you don't have, or there's more than one person. Okay? So they've got to have means or power to do it. The second is there has to be an opportunity. This is why we want to avoid this in the very beginning. We talk about protection. We want to avoid those things that create that opportunity for risk of that exposure to a hazard. And so opportunity just basically means the circumstances surrounding the event gave that person or those persons that ability. When we look at that, most of the time we think about time, we think about distance, we think about the use of obstacles. Okay, so that is opportunity. So number one, they have to have power. They have to have the means to be able to do it, the power. Most of the time we think about a weapon, but it could be strength, it could be size, it could be the number of people. And then they've got to have opportunity. Again, that has a lot to do with how far away somebody is, how fast this is happening, what I can put in between myself and somebody else, a barrier. And then jeopardy has to exist. And what jeopardy means, very simply, is that I believe, this is where imminent comes in, I truly believe that at this moment or within the next second that this person or persons are going to use that ability and that opportunity to cause death or serious bodily injury to me or to somebody that I'm trying to protect. And so when we start to talk about defense, you can see why this is always last. And as protectors, our job is number one, to be aware. And number two, to do everything we can to avoid that risk or that hazard. Okay? Defense is always last. Okay? Hey, I hope it helped. I'm giving just basic tools about protecting yourself, your church, that basic protection model, what that means when we're trying to be aware. So we talk about awareness, like what is going on today? Why is it happening? So I hope you got some information on that. Number two, we start to talk about avoidance. We're trying to get away from the risk, separate ourselves from that risk and avoid it totally. What that means, and I hope those open source information tools help you if you're trying to learn how to do this. And then, of course, three, we talked about defense. We talk about what that means, what the requirements are for self-defense, very specifically the use of deadly force, and what the ramifications could be if you violate those rules.
Beverly asks, if a mob threatens to burn down our church, can we use force?
All right. So the question was, and I'll repeat it, so you're a church protector, a mob comes in, threatens to burn down the church. Can you use deadly force?
It just says force, but go ahead and cover both sides of it.
Hey, so let me cover this real quick. Understand, as protectors, even at the church is property. So let's talk about the use of deadly force. So in general, if someone's trying to damage property, the use of deadly force, if it's just property itself, when we start to talk about the law, most of the time that's not going to be allowed. The use of deadly force is not going to be allowed, and it's property. And so this goes back to why we want to be aware of what's happening and why we want to try to avoid it. Okay? So when we're trying to protect property, we start to talk about the use of deadly force. That's probably not going to be allowed. Okay? Now, let's talk about the use of force as protectors. Again, if it's property, very specifically, if it's a church, the church is insured. And from a perspective of, as another protector, I would say if it's property, it's insured unless someone's life is in danger. I would do everything I can to avoid the use of force.
One more.
What's our next question?
And this is something we see. This is real. We've seen it on TV at least a couple of times. Kimberly asks, what if you were in a car and surrounded? Can you use force and deadly force? Help us understand that.
So the question was, hey, I get caught up in a civil unrest. I'm in my car. This has happened. We've seen it a couple times over the last week or 2 weeks. I get surrounded. What happens? Can I use? Is she asking? Can she use
force, but also cover deadly force?
Let's talk about it.
So the two different.
So I'm in a vehicle. I'm in a 3,000-pound vehicle, which, by the way, can be used as a weapon. Someone's trying to get me out of that vehicle. So first of all, let me kind of go over protection of the vehicle. If you get caught in a situation, you're in a car, very specifically civil unrest. There's a number of people. Do everything you can to use that car to get away. So stay in the car, because that's going to be a barrier between you and someone else. So we start to talk about jeopardy to be able to get out of that situation. So number one, always be aware of where you are. Number two, if you're inside that car, do everything you can to stay inside that car and leave. Now let's talk about the car gets surrounded. So if the car is surrounded and someone's trying to pull you out like we have seen, remember, we have to go through this process: ability, opportunity, jeopardy. And as we start to think about ability, remember we talked about some things like perception, all right? Some things like disparity of force, which means with a number of people that are bigger, people that have things that I don't have. So if that ability is there, you're in the car, someone's trying to get you out of the car, and you believe those folks have the ability, or there's a disparity of force, or you believe they have the ability, we call that reasonable perception, then that is one element in what's required for the use of deadly force. The next thing is opportunity. So what that means is now they have the ability, because there's a number of them, right? They've got weapons to get to you, or maybe you believe they do. If they have that opportunity, so if they're able to get through that barrier and reach in to try to get you, then that could be considered opportunity. And then now we have to think about jeopardy. If they're in the car, so the opportunity is there, they have ability, so there's the ability and opportunity to cause death or serious bodily injury to you. You believe that is imminent, because now they're inside that barrier. That time and distance has now been shortened, and all those questions are answered or yes, then deadly force potentially can be authorized. But again, this is a hypothetical situation, but we have seen it, and I saw one a week ago where that did happen. They were surrounded, I think it was in Seattle. They surrounded the car. They got into the window. They tried to pull the guy out. The guy had a pistol. He pulled the handgun, shot one of the protesters. The protesters fell. When the gun discharged, all the other protesters got away from the car. He was not able to drive out of the scene because he was surrounded by people. He got out of the vehicle. He did have to point the weapon at other people to get away. He very quickly made his way through the crowd, saw the police, laid the weapon down, put his hands up, and he turned himself in. To my knowledge, he has not been charged with a crime. So, again, going back, ability, opportunity, jeopardy must be there. Again, it's hypothetical. It's based on the situation. Can you do that? If ability, opportunity, and jeopardy are there, I check those boxes, yes. I believe it's going to happen. It could be. Any other questions?
One more. It's a little bit more of a in your home. So
Yep.
but we'll go ahead and ask it because it could be maybe in your business as well. If I'm in my home, so Deborah's asking if I'm in my home and I have my concealed permit. Can somebody bursts into my house? What are the repercussions of deadly force? So maybe what if this is your business and you're in a civil unrest environment? Maybe replace home with business and see what that looks
Yep.
like.
So here in the state of Tennessee, there is the presumption of the law. They get into your business, your home, a dwelling, your vehicle. The use of deadly force is authorized, but you still have to answer questions. So let's just say it's your home or civil arrest. Somebody breaks in. Use the same standard. They're breaking inside your home. You believe you're at risk. So there's ability, opportunity, and jeopardy of death or serious bodily injury to yourself or to someone in your home that you want to protect. Then deadly force could be authorized. But this is based on what is happening at the time. So do they have the power? Do they have the means? So do they have a weapon? How many of them are there? Number two, do they have the opportunity based on the situation and circumstances? Time, distance, barriers. Has that ability been given to them based on the circumstances? So is the opportunity there? And then, of course, jeopardy. All right. So do you believe? So if you have ability and opportunity, do you believe as they busted in that you or someone else is going to suffer death or serious bodily injury, and that is going to happen in that moment? So there are some states where under the law, so there's a presumption under the law that if someone forces their way into a business, car, or residence, that deadly force is authorized. But I would tell you to continue to go back to those elements and ask yourself those questions, because you will have to answer those questions. And let me tell you a situation, a story. I mean, it's true, to tell you how serious this is. Okay, we talk about citizens and why preparedness is so important in prevention. I have a friend that is on a church safety team, and he also works for a good friend of mine. He is in security full-time. He is a professional protector. He is Puerto Rican. After the hurricane, he moved from Puerto Rico to the United States. He relocated here. Full-time protector in Puerto Rico at the time. After the hurricane, his home was destroyed, and again, he relocated his family to the United States. He was staying in an extended hotel, extended stay hotel, not about 15 miles east of here, just outside of Nashville in a suburb, still in Davidson County. His wife and him come home from church one day. There's an elevator outside this extended stay. The extended stay is 3 or 4 stories tall, and so there's an elevator. They get on this elevator as they're going up to their room, I think on the 2nd or 3rd floor, and there's a gentleman that gets on the elevator with him. Right away, my friend says something didn't seem right about the guy. Okay? So they get to their floor. The guy kind of moves out of the way. They get off. They get in their room. They don't think anything about him. My friend, who's a professional protector, at the time he had his carry permit. I think even then he had his armed guard card. And so he was armed at the time when he's on the elevator with this guy. He happens to take his pistol off, lays it in the room as they're kind of, relaxing from church. There is a knock at the door. He looks outside, and it's the guy that was on the elevator with him. And he's like, wonder what he wants. He thought something wasn't right on the elevator, but he opens the door to, maybe the guy wants money. There's something he's looking for. Opens the door, and as the door opens, the guy has a knife, and he's trying to stab my friend. He's coming through the door in a room that he has rented, so it's a dwelling in the state of Tennessee, and he's trying to stab my friend. Now, my friend is a boxer or grew up boxing, so using boxing and some other skills, as he's screaming to his wife to try to get his pistol, he is trying to like literally defend himself against this knife, and he's kind of getting cut up on his arms. As he's fighting this guy, he punches, gets a couple good punches in, stuns the guy. He's able to get to his pistol. This guy's still trying to continue to stab him, and he shoots him center mass a couple of times. After he shoots the guy takes off running, runs out of the room, makes a left, runs down 2 to 3 flights of stairs. My friend is in pursuit. He's trying to chase him because he's like, why was he doing this? And he didn't want him to go out and stab somebody else or harm somebody else. So he's chasing him, trying to take him into custody. This guy runs down 2 or 3 flights of stairs through the parking lot. He's already been shot a couple times, center mass. Gets into the back area of this extended stay, and his blood pressure finally, so it's hit something important to the body, the projectile did, and the blood pressure starting to drop, and this guy slows down running and finally collapses. My friend then stands over him with a pistol. By this time, his wife had called 911 minutes before, as all this fighting was happening. The police get there. They draw down on my friend. They tackle him. They don't know what's happening. Get a gun from him, handcuff him, take him into custody. At some point, they did unhandcuff him once they got the story, but he's in custody. Under the Fourth Amendment, he is in custody. He is taken to a police department. He's taken to a precinct. A detective shows up. He is interrogated. He's interviewed. He's questioned. He's held for a number of hours, and then he is released. The suspect, after he's out of the hospital, of course, is arrested. He's charged. This has happened 3 years ago. It took over a year and a half for my friend to get his pistol back, and it took a long time for the county or for Metro, for the DA to tell him that he wouldn't be charged with anything. He did everything he was supposed to do. He did everything right. Some guy forced his way into a room, tried to attack him and his wife. He defended himself, had a gun legally, forced a way into a room. He defended himself and went through a very long process, a very long legal process, a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. So when we start talking about when can we use force, even if we do everything right, we know there's ability, we know there's opportunity, we know there's jeopardy. As a private citizen, that process is probably not going to be desirable for us. So as protectors, we do everything we can to be aware, and we do everything we can to avoid.
So we do have one more.
All right, one more question. So, good. What's the question?
So Penny is asking, if you see someone who's not with you being attacked with a weapon, so maybe during a civil unrest, can you help them?
So in the state of Tennessee, and this is in most other states, but I can't speak for that for sure, but I will tell you, states I've lived in, Tennessee, Missouri, South Carolina, some other locations, can you help someone who is under attack? Here in the state of Tennessee, you can. So number one, Penny, if you're out of state, I would look at the state law, but here you can. So if you see someone that is being attacked and you believe that they are going to suffer death or serious bodily injury, and you believe that person attacking them has that ability, opportunity, and jeopardy is involved, can you defend them? In the state of Tennessee, you can. That's under TCE 3911-612, defense of innocent third party or others. So you can. In this state, if you see someone else, an innocent person being attacked, you believe that they're going to suffer death or serious bodily injury, and those elements are there. Here, you are able to defend that other person. You know the questions? All right, guys. Hey, I'm not an attorney, and I didn't stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. That's a joke. Maybe you get that, or maybe you didn't. We just teach self-defense. I'm a full-time protector for a church, for a major global corporation, and then there are times when people ask us to protect them, and so we do this a lot. Hey, we hope you enjoyed today. We hope it was helpful. Well, we answered a lot of questions. Thanks for all the questions. We hope the information that was in the presentation is going to help you protect your church, protect your family, protect someone that you're charged with actually protecting or safeguarding. All right? If you're protecting your church, or even if you're not, you're protecting somebody else, we're thinking about you, we're praying about you. Things are crazy, but understand that there's nothing new under the sun. That this has been going on for a long time. You can go back into the Old Testament and look 3,000 years ago. We were having the same problems. We're just all broken. We're human beings. Violence doesn't solve anything. It is peaceful people that are led by God, that want change, that change the minds of people, and that make people go to the polls and vote to change laws. Okay? So we're thinking about you. We're praying about you. We're praying for you. If you have any questions, please email them to us. Just if you're in Nashville, we invite you to our Handgun Safety and Personal Protection. Again, that's July 7th. You're going to get a chance to win free prizes, including self-defense tools, range passes, and some discount on that you can apply toward some of our upcoming training. All right? Again, we're thinking about you folks. We're praying for you. Hey, don't let your heart be troubled. You know the end of the story. It's just going to be uncomfortable while we're down here. And remember, it's about prevention, not response.